Hi people, it's Sarkovist here, and today I'm going to be reviewing the no doubt highly polarising game, Sonic Forces. Like many others, I can't resist but talk about Sonic's history very briefly here, because it's a series that's undoubtedly had its ups and downs. We've had some immense highs of Sonic Generations, which I consider to be one of my favourite games of the last generation of consoles, and then we've had very deep lows like Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. Now, I would put Sonic Forces not in the middle because I don't want to put it even close to Sonic 2006, but it is very close to Generations. Not quite as good in my opinion, but it is just on the borderline. So, let's begin with the premise of the game. Eggman once again wants to take over the world, and you know what? He actually manages to do it this time. You rush to face him and take him down as Sonic, but this being known as Infinite stops you, who has a fantastic voice actor, by the way. I really admired the way he delivered some of the lines. I feel like if they'd have given it to anyone else, it might have come across as corny, but he is surprisingly good. So yeah, Sonic gets taken down by this guy. It goes to space prison, and while Sonic's in space prison, Eggman successfully takes over the world, and then after that, you as the avatar character, which is a character of your own making, has to try and stop him, and one of your first steps is to break Sonic out of prison, fight back, and also you encounter classic Sonic very early on, and so you end up with 3 forms of gameplay as a result, and this is all within the first stages of the game. I won't talk about the story beyond this in any kind of specific way because I don't want to spoil anything here, but you know what, this is one of the best Sonic stories I think I've ever played. It has a lot of focus, it doesn't get too corny, and I think it's very appropriate to its tone. And the voice acting as well is something that I always go into a Sonic game thinking, okay, get ready for it, it's going to be an absolute cringe fest. But with the exception of Silver, it's strange that I'm making that as a point. He doesn't even talk much, but with the exception of Silver, I liked all the voice acting here. I think Sonic's voice actor in particular, he's gotten so much better since whoever the person who did it 10 years ago was doing it. This guy, he can be very energetic, that comes across very well, but he also delivers comedy lines very well. You know, it's quite impressive compared to what's been done before. And then, as I say, Infinite's voice actor is exceptionally good. And then you've got Tails, who always sounds a bit like a little girl. What can you do? Shadow, who talks occasionally, is suitably brooding. And Eggman, who has always been fantastic, no matter where you go in the previous series. And they help to deliver a story which isn't overly ambitious, but it does give some context to what you're doing. Whereas Sonic Generations was just a run through of some old nostalgic levels with this very loose thread of the time meter coming in, there is actually a plot here, there's a narrative, there's a tangible villain, you are the hero, you've got objectives to do between each mission, so there's a reason why you're doing each mission. There's also cutscenes, a lot of cutscenes that again add to the contextualization of the stages you're going to. You'll notice that you are in fact visiting a lot of zones from older games, but because of Eggman taking over the world, you see them in a slightly different light. So now Green Hill Zone is turning into Sandy Green Hill Zone because of the decay that his rule has brought. You've also got the Mystic Ruins, which has been turned into some kind of casino. So it actually does a good job of being both nostalgic because you know these areas, but then again fresh because there's some new take on them which is appropriate to the plot itself. I don't want to make it sound like the story is a selling point for the game. I don't think it ever has been for Sonic, but what I have recognised in previous Sonic games is that it can be considered an actual weakness. In this game it is by no means a weakness. I think it was entertaining and did a lot for me enjoying the game. And what I would recommend doing is playing through on the normal difficulty so that you get some momentum and get to appreciate the cutscenes and what's going on. It doesn't do anything too bizarre, I didn't think. There's no overly convoluted plot points. It is, I think it's fair to say, pretty straightforward. The story won't blow your mind and the characters aren't overly complex, but I liked it, and I think fans of the series in particular will really appreciate that all of the cast are making an appearance in their voiceover work. So you might be running through a stage and they'll be telling you what's going on, and usually what they're saying is heavily based in the traits of their character. So you have Amy, who's always worrying about Sonic. You've got Tails, who's a bit nervous and naive but believes in Sonic. You've got Knuckles, who's quite stern and sort of commanding, and again, I didn't mention Knuckles' voice actor, but he's another one who does a very good job compared to previous iterations. So, the gameplay, what matters more than anything. So there are 3 different ways you can experience Sonic Forces. You've got Classic Sonic, Avatar mode, and Modern Sonic. I will say right now that my favourite mode is Modern Sonic. I absolutely love the boost mode. I've loved it since Sonic Unleashed and I continue to like it now. However, there is one way in which this does take a back step, I'm afraid, and that is the removal of the ability to drift around corners. Now, whenever you go around a tight corner, it's more or less auto-adjusts for you. I wish they'd have left the ability to drift in because it was an added gameplay element, but it's not the end of the world that it's gone. But other than that, I really liked it. You have to collect wisps, and as you do, you gain more boost, and boost allows you to move incredibly fast and instantly destroy enemies that get in your way. You can jump up in the air and do a homing attack, and often you're asked to stream homing attacks together to defeat enemies and close gaps. There's some light platforming involved in this version of the game, but it's not too heavy. It will switch between a behind view and a side view. And something I will say that I only realised towards the end of the game, and maybe this is personal preference, but it's worth pointing out. At first I thought the side-on controls were very floaty in terms of moving back and forth. However, when I stopped using the analog stick and started using the D-pad, this is on the PlayStation 4 by the way, I found it to be a lot more precise and found myself better able to tackle the more demanding areas with greater ease and precision. Something I don't mind, but I will say it because it's worth pointing out, is that it can feel like it's on rails at times because you can be just holding down the boost button, going really fast, and although the game looks fantastic as you're moving really quickly, you're not doing a great deal. I don't mind this too much simply because I love the sense of speed, and also they will throw in things like you have to sidestep every now and then, so if you hit the right bumper or the left bumper you'll go right and left to avoid objects without losing any sense of speed. And overall I think it's a really unique sense of gameplay. I can't draw any comparisons to any other game. This is something that is solely unique to Sonic, and something that I've come to value as I play more and more games are unique gameplay styles. So as impressive as many of these open world games are, you find they have a lot of the same beats. There is nothing that I can say truly resembles the modern boosting Sonic version of play, and I really respect that. Yes, we have seen it before in the likes of Sonic Unleashed, Generations and Colors, but in terms of looking outside this series, it is wholly unique. Then you have the classic Sonic version of play, which resembles, for if you've played it recently, Sonic Mania, where it is exclusively side-on action, and I found the platforming to be a little bit more demanding in terms of requiring precision. This would be my least preferred version of play simply because I considered it to be the least unique. Nothing wrong with it, it's just very simple, and as a result I can't review it too much because it is just basic platforming. I think I would have liked to have seen slightly harder stages, if I'm honest with you. When I got to one of the final stages with Classic Sonic, it was a little bit more demanding than previous stages, and I thought to myself, I wish the rest of the game had been a bit more like this, because some of the earlier stages unfortunately do feel a little bit simplistic. For instance, Sonic has the ability to jump onto an enemy's head, and then after he does that, he will do an instant spin dash when he hits the floor. I don't think the game requires you to do this as much as it should have done, because it's an interesting idea. So that's Classic Sonic, not my favourite, but there's nothing inherently wrong with it. Again, I would recommend trying the D-pad if you're finding the analog stick to be a little bit floaty. Then there's the Avatar mode, and by far the mode which I was most afraid of. Something that I have had concerns about with Sonic games since my early experience of Sonic Adventure is that there can be fantastic gameplay stages with the Sonic stuff. There can also be these add-on elements which are designed to bulk out the game. I think the classic example of this would be Big the Cat, where in the original Sonic Adventure you had a character who went fishing which is a massive juxtaposition to the speed that Sonic represents and grossly undermined the overall experience of the game. And while you could argue that you didn't have to play him, it did contribute to a final ending which did add to the story in a big way, so you couldn't really ignore him. And so I always look at Sonic games to add new elements in with some skepticism, because I don't want another Big the Cat, if that makes sense. But the Avatar mode is interesting because it's Sonic without his boost, but with the added bonus of being able to use a weapon of some kind. I've only used a couple so far. I've used a flamethrower and I've used a lightning whip. And what I liked about this is that it doesn't really slow you down, particularly the flamethrower which you start off with. I was worried that because you're having to use a weapon, you'd have to slow down significantly in order to use it, but you can move very fast while using your flamethrower. So if you get surrounded by enemies, it's not like you go into a combat mode. You can just spin around very quickly, destroy them all, and keep up the momentum, and it's a lot more satisfying, I think, than if they'd made it into a Werehog-esque gameplay mode where they had health bars. You can destroy them very quickly, and arguably the Avatar is one of the best characters at taking enemies down. He also has a classic homing attack which he uses a grappling hook to do, but functionally it's the same as Sonic. He can also use that grappling hook to swing from certain locations, though it doesn't really add to the complexity of the gameplay because it's very easy, but it makes it a little bit more dynamic. So the Avatar is quite fun to play, and the weapon system is very well implemented into the sense of speed. It doesn't slow you down. Even the lightning whip, where you have to stop to swing it very quickly, it's only a brief stop and you can keep going very fast after using it. You also get burst powers with this, so with the flamethrower you can use it to get an extra spring, which means you can collect rings that would have been otherwise unobtainable, and with the lightning whip you can do the light dash, which is known from previous games. So Sonic can't light dash it seems anymore, but you can do it with the Avatar. Some may not like the fact that Sonic has lost an ability. I don't mind so long as it comes into form in some respect during the gameplay, which it does. And this works into the replay value of the game, because so what you can then do is use the different weapons to access items that you otherwise wouldn't be able to. And what's more is that when you're playing on hard mode, your score is recorded online. So this gives an asynchronous form of multiplayer where you're not just racing to beat your best, you're racing to be the very best. And chances are, unless you're very, very good, you won't be at the top of the leaderboard, so there will always be a person to try and beat. So, in theory, you have infinite replay value here, which is quite nice. And the stages don't have quite as many branching paths as I would have liked, especially the earlier ones, but there's enough for them to hide red rings around for you to collect, and enough for the stages to feel a little bit different each time, but maybe not as much as Generations. And that's kind of what it comes down to. When I said earlier that I still prefer Generations to Sonic Forces, that's because I felt like there was a little bit more agency in the gameplay and a few more branching areas. I feel like this is a very linear game, though it does have some branching paths. I mean, I wouldn't say it's that much more constrained, for example, than Crash the N. Sane Trilogy. It's linear like that in nature and also very fun. Going back to the Avatar for just a moment, one of the selling points of this game in some respects is the fact that you can customize this character to look however you want. Well, I say however you want, within the confines of the presets that the game gives you. To sum this up, I would say the customization options are robust, not exceptional, nor are they limited. It's enough, I think, to satisfy people who want to make their own character. You've got different species types, you've got different facial types. It's enough to make the Avatar stand out, I think. I also want to talk about the graphics. A lot of people dismiss visuals in these kind of games because they're not realistic, so they don't take them seriously, but I want to take a second to really commend them on what they've done here. Not only does the game have a fantastic visual presentation, whether it be the character designs, the environments, the post effects, because you've got things like light shafts and depth of field, but the frame rate on PlayStation is 60 frames per second for the majority of the time, which really complements the high-speed gameplay, and I really did like that. I understand it that on Nintendo Switch the game does run at 30 FPS, which is a little bit of a shame, but you have to remember that the Switch can also run in pulsable mode, so you have to accept that as a trade-off. So if you're on the Switch, you do get pulsable mode, but on the PlayStation you get 60 frames per second, and it does look gorgeous. I was actually playing on a PlayStation 4 Pro, and the resolution is very nice. I didn't see any noticeable jaggies. It's actually quite surprising. You don't normally see a game on consoles that runs at 60 frames per second for the most part, and also has such a clear presentation. So I really do give major props to the designers for making the game look as it does. It won't blow you away, but it does a great job. And I think Sonic Unleashed and Sonic Generations were similarly very good looking, but they only ran at 30 FPS on consoles at the time. This is 60 frames per second and it looks wonderful. And also, what I said about characters' designs, I think they did a good job of just making them simple. They are basic anthropomorphic animals. Don't need to make them too difficult, just make them simple colours and they will stand out. And it seems like this is a world that isn't inhabited by humans at all. So they're not the realistic humans of 06 or the cartoony humans of Unleashed. These are just animals in an animal world, which makes far more sense when you're playing as a hedgehog who can talk. I did quite like Infinite's design. Sega seemed to be quite good at making quote-unquote edgy characters, and I do think Infinite is pretty good for that. So in some respects, although he's not a particularly complex villain, and I don't think his motives were that great, he's got a great voice actor, and he's got a great design, so if nothing else, he's cool. I think something I omitted to mention was the boss fights in this game. For the most part, I did enjoy them. They weren't anything spectacular, nothing that, for me at least, came up against Sonic Generations' fight against Chaos, but they were okay with the exception of one fight against Infinite when you're playing as the Avatar. The controls for me just didn't feel like they worked with how the fight wanted me to respond. I didn't die much, but I just kept getting hit by things, and when I did eventually win, it just felt cheap, like I'd just been constantly having to grab my rings and recollect them. It just didn't feel like a great fight, to be honest. But other than that, they were all reasonably strong. Again, they weren't fantastic, but they were okay. I respected the variation in their design. Some you'll have to fight on a conventional platform in a 3D perspective. Some you'll have the side-on view, like when you have to fight the Egg Dragoon. And some you'll have to fight while you're boosting, so you're running after them. Those were my personal favourites, but your mileage may vary, so to speak. Reviewing this game now, I really did like it, as you can probably tell. I said at the beginning I think it will be polarizing, and that's because Sonic is a polarizing series. Although I've described how I really enjoy the boost gameplay, a lot of people hate it. A lot of people consider it to be overly linear and far too much on rails, and that when you have challenge, the challenge becomes cheap. I see where they're coming from, but I can only speak to my own personal preference here. I do really like the boost gameplay. Classic Sonic is at worst inoffensive. It's not like it's doing anything spectacularly different. It's essentially a slightly less creative version of Sonic Mania. And the Avatar is an acceptable offering. He's in keeping with the speed of the series. He doesn't slow things down, although he's not as fast as Sonic. Oh, I forgot to mention, there are a few levels where you play as both Sonic and the Avatar. And what really surprised me is that the switching between the characters is utterly seamless. The fact I was playing as two characters didn't even play into it. I was just using their abilities as I needed to, and I have to commend them for doing that. Every now and then they'll get you to do this double boost where you mash the square button or your equivalent, and then you'll go really, really fast. This is pure just cool factor. There's no complex gameplay in doing this. It's just going super, super quick. Also, a nice bonus is that there are 3 missions that act as a prequel where you play as Shadow, and when you play those, it seems like you can unlock Shadow as a character in the regular Sonic stages as well, which is quite nice. I definitely recommend playing those Shadow stages because, well, A, why not? And secondly, they do add a little bit of explanation to the main story where otherwise you may have been a bit confused and scratching your head. When it comes down to it, although there is certainly some replay value here, I think Sonic Force's greatest weakness is its length, without a shadow of a doubt. This is a game that I completed a little bit too fast for my liking. But I have to, in some respects, understand why this is. If you look at any given modern boosting Sonic stage, you are going through them incredibly quick, and yet the environments are well detailed. If you stop for any moment, you'll see things in the background, there's some detail in the foreground itself. This has all had to have been created. You are going through this so fast that you will see aspects of the stages for mere seconds, right? It's somewhat understandable that they couldn't make a 10-hour game while having you move so fast through it. In fact, experiencing this is making me wonder if the werehog in Sonic Unleashed was put there because they realised that they just couldn't make a whole game out of modern Sonic because you just would go through it too fast. And you know what, although again I have said I have a preference for Sonic Generations, I think these are about the same length, so if you found Sonic Generations replay and overall length acceptable, you will find Sonic Forces length acceptable. Also, as you continue to replay stuff, you will unlock items for your avatar. This doesn't do a great deal for me. I don't really mind what my character's wearing too much. You know, you barely see them anyway because they seem so small when there's a lot of action going on. You've also got secret stages and extra stages which present a little bit more of a challenge to add to the main gameplay. They're very short, but they are definitely worth talking about and add to the overall value. So now we come to the recommendation of Sonic Forces. Is it worth buying? Because it is just so short if you don't take into account replay value, I am a little bit hesitant to recommend it. However, something you have to consider is that this is not a full price game. In the PlayStation Store it only cost me £35, whereas for a AAA game I might be paying upwards of £50, so I can't judge the value for money on the same level. But even still, it is quite short, so you might make the argument that you could wait for a price drop. However, if you're a Sonic fan, I think you'll appreciate what this game does so much that you won't mind the fact that it is a little short, and the fact that, after all, you might be willing to replay many of the levels to get the highest score, the fastest time, and just to appreciate the game for what it is. One thing I am very confident in saying is that Sonic Forces is not a bad game. It is a good game, maybe not quite a great game, but in terms of the series as a whole, in terms of what I played, I should say, because I haven't played every game. I haven't played the Wii U games like Sonic Lost World or the Sonic Boom games. I've played Sonic Unleashed, I've played Sonic Generations, I've played Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 and Sonic Heroes. And they've all, if I must admit, they've been diamonds in the rough. And that's very much my impression of Sonic. But it has a massive fan base for a reason, because what it does right, it does very well. And like I said earlier, the fact that modern Boost Sonic is just so unique and that I can't really compare it to any other game is a fantastic creative element for the team who make it. It's not new in and of itself because of course we have seen that in the series, we've seen that in Generations and Unleashed, but so far no one's copied it, right? This is a unique to Sonic feature. To sum up Sonic Forces, it is short but sweet, and it does have replay value for those who want to be the best. As always people, thanks very much for watching and see you next time.